The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.
On this episode of Comes with the Territory, facing financial hardships, the Humane Society of St. Thomas was recently forced to lay off most of its dedicated staff. Executive Director Michelle Robbins is with us to share the gravity of the situation and what this means for the countless stray and abandoned animals on the island. With the resignation of Hannah Carty as Executive Director of the Office of Cannabis Regulations, the landscape of cannabis regulation in the territory is set to experience a period of transition and uncertainty. We'll have more. Plus,
either they're going to get to a building or get off our property.
We need the casino to be built first.
Developers of the Randall Doc James Racetrack have stated that the project's success hinges on obtaining a license to operate a racetrack casino, which would serve as its primary revenue source. Stay tuned for more details on this development and later. This week's panel joins the conversation to analyze these issues and more. Comes with the Territory starts now. Thank you for tuning in to Comes with the Territory. I'm Leslie Camisiang. For over 60 years, the Humane Society of St. Thomas has been a lifeline for abandoned and stray animals on the island. However, recent challenges have pushed this vital 501c3 organization to the brink, highlighting the critical need for community support. Less than 24 animals were being cared for at the Humane Society of St. Thomas recently, a remarkable improvement from the desperate conditions at the shelter less than a month ago, when well over 200 animals crammed the shelter beyond its capacity. However, relief came just in time in the form of a large-scale donation funded transportation facilitated by Pets with Wings. This initiative successfully transferred hundreds of dogs and cats and bunnies to mainland no-kill shelters, alleviating the burden of the Humane Society of St. Thomas. While this intervention provided immediate relief, it's clear that it's a Band-Aid solution for a much larger issue. The Humane Society of St. Thomas, an open admission shelter, annually sees over 2,000 animals in need of care, assistance, and homes. Unlike many areas, St. Thomas lacks dedicated government-funded animal control services, placing the immense responsibility of animal welfare solely on the shoulders of the Humane Society. The organization relies on donations and community support, with only a small contract from the Virgin Islands government offering limited assistance. Unfortunately, donations to the Humane Society of St. Thomas have been declining in recent years, a problem exacerbated by the overwhelming stray animal population. This dire situation has forced the organization into a state of emergency, leading to recent decisions to lay off 17 employees. Now, with only a skeleton crew of 5 staff members left to manage all departments, the Humane Society of St. Thomas is in urgent need of increased financial support and volunteers. The future of their ability to serve the animals of St. Thomas depends entirely on the generosity of the community. Joining me on set to delve into what she described as a state of emergency at the Humane Society of St. Thomas is Executive Director Michelle Robbins. Welcome to Comes with the Territory.
Thank you for having me.
Give us a little bit of history and background about the organization, how long they've been on the island, and what exactly they do in the community.
So we have been operating for about 60 years in different locations. Our current location, we've been there for 12. And, you know, it has become a very big issue here with adopting animals out. So we have ended up with almost a hoarding situation.
Wow.
I just came over to the shelter side of things about 3 months ago. After a month and a half of being there, I was asked to take the position of executive director. and it has been a whirlwind of really digging into the past situations and issues, and there's just so much that has gone on or hasn't gone on that we need to fix.
Well, let's talk about some of those issues. I know that growing up here, um, we used to see stray animals all over. And there's no question, I think any observant individual can say that in the last 30 years, there has been a drastic reduction in the amount of stray animals we see on the island. And that's because the Humane Society is playing its part in the reduction of animals on our roadsides, roaming around the community. But as a result of doing that, it's almost like the organization has taken on too much.
Yes, we're the only organization here in St. Thomas that can handle the animals. And it is a lot. We have a program, Pets with Wings. It was housed under the Humane Society, and recently they're actually going to become their own program because they're so big and strong and have such a good team that they can help potentially the other islands. So they have branched off into their own 501c, and I think that's really a huge benefit to everybody to be able to utilize them to transfer animals off island. We also have recently set up a spay and neuter clinic, and that will dramatically decrease the amount of stray cats and the dogs, and we are offering options free and low cost to the community, in the hopes that people will spay and neuter their animals because many don't.
I remember Bob Barker, he would always close his Price is Right show with a reminder to spay and neuter your animals. But, that education that he undertook on his show, how do we get that out to the community that really is the answer to helping with the overpopulation issue we have on the island?
Isn't that the question of the day? I think this is a good start, raising awareness. I think a lot of people don't know the importance of it. I also know that it's expensive. We only have 2 vets on island, and they're booked solid, and it costs a lot of money. So having this new option, the spay and neuter clinic there at the Humane Society, will really, really reduce the animal intake, and I think it will help to spread awareness over time that we can do this for free for people.
So are there education programs that the Humane Society runs, as well? Do you have students come out to visit the campus, or do you go into schools and teach students the importance of spaying and neutering animals?
We do. With the students, we talk more about behavior of the animals. We don't really get into that with the young children. We talk about how we can train and how we can treat our animals and not necessarily have them chained up outside, that they can be a part of the family, a member of the family. We do get a lot of students that come in, they have to do volunteer time for their schools. So we do get a good amount of students, and that's when I think they really get the education that they need, because they get to see it firsthand and walk the dogs and feed the dogs or play with the cats. So they really are, I think that's a huge tool that they do have to do community service.
So let's talk about the business and administrative side of the Humane Society. How do you get your funding? What it costs to run the shelter? Of course, if you have, you just talked about getting 500 animals off island. I could only imagine what it costs to feed 500 animals. There must be, exorbitant costs that are involved.
Yes, it's between 1.2 and 1.6 over the past few years that we've spent on a yearly basis with having staff that we need. We historically relied a lot on volunteers, but when you have that many animals, you have to know that you have people there to help. And so between the cost of the staff and all the food and litter and medical expenses that we have for the animals, they all get their vaccines and their shots and they're microchipped, and they do get altered, so we spay and neuter them ourselves. All of that adds up, and it really is very expensive. Most of our money ends up coming from donations. We have a lot of donors that will step up, especially if we need a vet bill paid or, we were having our salaries paid by donors. We get 175,000 a year from the government,
And that's like
that's gone. And
10% of the $1.2 million you need to
right,
spend every year.
that's nothing compared to
Yeah.
what we actually need. We do have a thrift store on site that's kind of where I got my start, was helping out there, and so that's turned around quite a bit. It does make about 40,000 a month at the thrift store, and it's a very small building, so that's pretty incredible. But that still doesn't touch the electric costs, water that we have to order twice a week. We have a propane to run our crematory. So there's, the costs just keep adding up. And then the facility, it's 12 years old, obviously is going to need maintenance and typical repairs.
So let's talk about what has triggered the most recent round of layoffs that you had. And then after that, I want to help educate the community as to how we can help the organization. So the crisis and the state of emergency that you're in right now, what has been the reason?
So when I first came to the shelter side of things, I had to issue a code red. We had no more space. We had dogs everywhere. They were in office spaces, hallways, the laundry, in storage spaces.
Wow.
They were outside, under the roof, like they were everywhere. And we just could not, I couldn't believe how are they operating like this. So I issued a code red, and we just could not take in another animal. I had nowhere to put them. And so that really triggered a frenzy. I don't think anybody really realized how bad off the Humane Society was. It looked like a hoarding facility. It was really bad.
And is that because I know some shelters have a euthanization policy. What's the euthanization policy out at the Humane Society?
Yeah, so it's the same as it's been since 2010. We euthanize for medical or behavior challenges. We don't euthanize for space, and that has been the problem. In the past, we had aggressive dogs, and we weren't really necessarily following that. And again, when I came over to that side in November, there were many aggressive dogs that had been there for 2 years. It's 2.5 years. And so if you imagine them being in a small space, even you take the nicest dog, and after several, even weeks, they start to change.
Yeah.
And so now you add 2 years to this dog's sentence, and it really, they go crazy.
Yeah.
So once we started to create this awareness, and we talked with Pets with Wings, and they did a huge push, and they said, tough choices will be made for these aggressive dogs. And that's when there was a big support. It just came up out of 17 different states.
Wow.
Yeah, and so many people, rescues, people were adopting from the states. Pets with Wings did an amazing job getting this whole transport to happen. I was hoping that 30 to 40 dogs would go, and they got all of them out, all but 4.
Wow.
So yeah, it was really an incredible thing that they were able to pull off.
So how can the community help? For instance, if you want to adopt a dog or foster a dog, how does that process work?
Yeah, just come on in. We have some applications, so we want to make sure that your home is suitable for the dogs. So we do a little bit of a vetting process, and then you can meet the dogs. Even if we don't have one that is at that time, that's something you're looking for. Like a lot of people here, there's landlord restrictions.
Yes.
So they want a small dog, a small little fluffy dog, or whatever type. So we can take that information, and if a dog like that comes in, we can let you know.
Let me ask you something. If you could wave a magic wand and get everything you needed from the government, from the community, how would what do you, in that perfect world, how would it all work? How would the Humane Society work? like, what would you need from the government? What would you need from the community so that we can make sure we help to keep the population of stray animals and cats in check, and also have the organization function not being under distress?
Oh, I would definitely hope for more money to support everybody and the staff. They work very hard, and now with just the 5, they're having to do double time with the same pay. So I would definitely hope for more money. I would hope for better education about the spay and neuter situation and the community support to bring these animals in, help trap them, bring them in for our clinics, and then you can release them. They do thrive out there. Bringing them in is not always the best option, to have them stuck in cages, and then ultimately, if they're there for years, then what? So many of them are thriving, and so I guess I would just hope that the community could step up and help with the spay and neuter program and keep the donations coming, and know that we are trying to fix things that happened in the past. We're uncovering stuff all the time of things that we just didn't do right.
Yeah, I read
before.
about mismanaged relationships and misunderstandings and miscommunications that has happened in the community. We have about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to give you an opportunity right now. If you had a chance to talk to legislators, what do they need to know about what you guys do, the $175,000 that you currently receive from the government, how much that needs to be increased, and why it is important that they increase their support to the Humane Society?
I would say the biggest reason would be tourism, because right now we don't have the money or the funds to be able to go out and we don't have an animal control department. So the community calls, and they're asking for our help. And
so you're serving a government function that normally other municipalities pay for.
Right. And we just can't do this. We can't, if I'm already shorthanded now, we can't send these guys out to go find a cat or go down to Megan's Bay and get the dogs. We have to take care of the animals we have. It is important. And that to me also is reflective for tourism, because if it goes on like this, imagine all these cruise ships coming and we just can't get any help to get these stray dogs and cats off the street. It really is important to have the money to fund what we're trying to do.
Well, I wish you guys the best. And I can tell you, as I said, as a Virgin Islander growing up here on the island, I do know the impact that the Humane Society has had on this island. It is real and it is visible. So thank you for all your hard work. And thanks for being on the show, Michelle.
Thank you.
Up next, we'll hear from this week's Power Panel. But first, let's look at the issues up for discussion.
Congratulations.
Last January, Governor Albert Bryan Jr. signed into law the Virgin Islands Cannabis Use Act, which allowed adults to legally use cannabis for medical, sacramental, and other reasons, pending the creation of rules and regulations for the newly approved industry. The entity charged with implementing the regulatory framework for legal cannabis use in the territory has been the Office of Cannabis Regulations, under its first and only executive director, Hannah Carty. But Carty's resignation, effective this month, has left concerns regarding a potential disruption to the long-awaited regulatory process. In an interview with WTJX's newsfeed about her departure, Carty detailed the current priorities of OCR.
The main things that we're working on right now are putting out the registry system so that practitioners, sacramental organizations, patients, sacramental users, and business agents will have access to the registry system, particularly for sacramental organizations and for sacramental users and for patients. This is a very critical component of the program, because that is what's going to allow them to not have any issues when it comes to law enforcement. And additionally, with the auto expungement program, these are the key components in the building blocks for the cannabis program. And then when a new person steps into the position, they would step in having to deal with completing the rules and regulations, being able to see comments from the community, comments from myself, comments from the board, and be able to compile that information in a way that makes sense.
CARDI has been essentially functioning as a team of one, and OCR does not have any other staff. With CARDI's departure and OCR currently lacking staff, the future of cannabis regulation in the territory remains uncertain.
Either they're going to get to a building or get off our property.
In apparent frustration, Governor Albert Bryan Jr. on February 8th called for an end to the government's contract with VIGL, the company attempting to redevelop St. Croix's Randall Doc James racetrack since 2016.
These people, we've given them every chance, and I'm at the point now, and I've asked them point blank, just give up the contract. You know, you could give up the contract, just give it up. We won't charge you a dime, we're good. Just give us back our track. Because the odds of them getting this built is nil to none.
But VIGL remains committed to getting the project on track, according to Chief Financial Officer Andrew Dubuque, who emphasized that a racetrack casino license or Racino license is crucial for the business model to be sustainable.
A lot of the people in the community, and I want to clarify this, have really been wondering, you know, well, why don't you just get started on items that are not related to the casino and get the racing aspect of it done. We are businessmen first and foremost, and in order to have a sustainable business model to make this work, we need the casino to be built first. It has to be.
A license is needed to begin building a 15,000 square foot modern casino, and then the remainder of the racetrack facility, including grandstands, receiving barns, and parade ground areas, would follow the casino construction to complete the 2-year build-out of the overall project, Dubuque said. VIGL has applied to the Casino Control Commission for the Racino license. During a packed meeting on February 21st, the commission heard testimony from various parties.
We, the Flamboyant Park Hasman Association, favor the VICCC granting VIGL their Racino license.
Also voicing their support were representatives from the Big Island's Horsemen, a retiree and former vice chair of the Horse Racing Commission and the director of the Division of Gaming Enforcement. But not everyone agreed. Susan Varnes, president of the Treasure Bay VI Corporation, owners of DV Carina Bay Casino, submitted testimony opposing the license applications. She urged the commission to wait until VIGL fulfills all existing agreements with the government, the Horsemen, Traxco, and TBVI. As VIGL awaits the decision on its Racino license, Dubuque stressed the company's commitment to the project.
Nobody spent more money or time on this than our group. We want this to happen more than anybody, and I think that really needs to be understood because we are committed. We have been committed. Through hurricanes, pandemics, 8 years, lawsuits, we're still at it. And we're still spending money, and we're still trying to make this project work. We believe it can work. We know it can work.
Joining this show from our St. Croix studio, let's welcome former Senate President Uzi Richards. And joining us virtually, we have attorney Key Walker, founder and managing attorney at the Walker Legal Group on St. Croix, and Janika Simon, editor of the Virgin Islands Consortium. Welcome to you all. Uzi, I'm going to come to you first and foremost on the island of St. Croix. After just hearing our interview with Michelle Robbins, what do you think the Virgin Islands legislature can do to help not only the St. Thomas Humane Society, but we know that the St. Croix Humane Society as well are also experiencing challenges with funding. And given the services that they provide that the government does not, that traditionally other municipalities would normally pay for, how can we step up to the plate to help fund these organizations in a better way?
The interview was quite interesting. It did, in fact, point out some of the concerns of being able to subsidize the private and nonprofit organizations and meeting some of the mandates where the government may fall short, and in this case, our environmental health and enforcement. I think outside of just the funding issue, there needs to be some stringent regulating of individuals who seek ownership of animals, have animals. The way they maintain the livelihood of these animals is very important. And I'm particularly pleased to hear that there has been some commitment not only by the St. Thomas group, but also by the St. Croix group of the Humane Society in assisting the government of the Virgin Islands and the people of the Virgin Islands in addressing this particular issue.
Attorney Walker, former Senator Richards brought up a very good point in that there needs to be regulations put in place to kind of govern ownership of animals. I recall a couple years ago, a gentleman in St. Croix, an elderly gentleman in his 80s, and immediately I thought about my father, who also is in his 80s, was attacked and severely injured by a neighbor's animal that had traditionally had issues. Neighbors had reported it before. There were run-ins, and then this elderly gentleman just going about his business, doing what he was supposed to do in his own yard, was attacked by this dog and had to be airlifted off of St. Croix. What can we do as a government to better govern how individuals are able to own animals, the amount, because sometimes we know that individuals hoard animals as well, and they don't have the funding to give them proper medical care, to spay and neuter, to help control population growth? What can we do to improve just how we deal with this situation overall?
We actually have law on the books for that. And we also have laws on the books for how you take care of your animals. I myself has represented someone who was charged with mistreating an animal and how he allegedly had the animal chained and had the animal out in the sun. So there's laws on the books. I just don't think that there's investment in the enforcement of these laws. I think, your officers who are on the street now are prioritizing other crimes, understandably so, over these crimes, and there just hasn't been an investment to enforce those laws. And that's the issue. But the laws are there. We just don't have the enforcement resources, I think, to really put them in effect and protect the community
It's
and the
interesting that you
animals.
say that. I'm going to go to Janika Simon, the editor at the Virgin Islands Consortium. Having heard from Attorney Walker, the fact that she has represented individuals, we have laws, but we run into this constant issue of a lack of enforcement, whether it's the ability to get the human resources necessary in individuals on the force. I remember in this particular situation with this elderly gentleman, the fact that a simple ticket booklet had not been developed by the government to be able to write tickets for when there are violations to individuals hadn't been done. And a simple thing like that would put people on guard and also be a way of generating revenue for the government of the Virgin Islands with fines that could be issued if we only just took the extra step to make these things happen. Any thoughts about how we go about implementing this and getting from a theoretical laws on the books, we know it's there, and no enforcement, to where everybody's just able to, basically operate with these rules not being implemented?
I think that this issue of lack of enforcement is something that is chronic within the territory. Just a couple of weeks ago, the issue of lack of enforcement and the lack of enforcement officers across all agencies that have peace officer employees was discussed in the Senate. I believe that was the Committee on Homeland Security, Justice, and Public Safety. And the legislators were talking about the revenue that's being left on the table in terms of the lack of enforcement of traffic violations, and saying that not everybody not every agency who can be looking at traffic tickets and issuing tickets, bringing revenue for the government, is doing so. And a large part of the reason that agency heads were saying is that they just don't have the personnel. You mentioned that police officers are focused on probably more violent crimes, and so I think that it's a systemic issue. It's something that agency heads really need to sit down when they're doing their budgetary calculations, because we have, I think, in the next couple of months, another budget cycle is going to begin. And the lawmakers really were sending a message to the agency heads. You need to really address this lack of personnel issue when you are doing your budgets, and bring in realistic budget appropriation requests so that people can fill those positions, so that you can start doing the enforcement, designing, the necessary ticket books, and actually doing the business of enforcement for the territory.
Another featured item that you saw in our news roundup was the resignation of Hannah Carty at the Office of Cannabis regulations. And I think this came as a surprise, especially for individuals who have been supportive of the government's moves towards legalizing cannabis use in the territory. However, this has been such a long time coming. I remember the first piece of legislation that Governor Albert Bryan signed upon coming into office in January of his term in 2019 was a medical marijuana use bill. And then we had a bill where, Key, you were there at the signing, that extended the use of cannabis in the territory. And that event was heralded with a lot of support, and we thought we were getting things on the go. But here we are now back to another roadblock along the road of getting cannabis use regulated, and where the territory can actually start to realize revenues from it. And the open secret in the territory is, the reality is, we have a cannabis industry, and we've had a cannabis industry in this territory for decades. And anybody that's being realistic can't ignore that fact. When you read the news about Ms. Carty's resignation, Key, what did you think, and what thoughts went through your head?
I'm still involved in the rollout of the cannabis program, so I wasn't surprised by it. However, I don't believe that Ms. Carty's resignation is going to slow the progress. There are a couple things that are going on right now, one of which is amendments to the legislation that really need to be implemented for the rollout to be successful. And those are before the legislature, and I understand that Senator Donna Fred Gregory's office is currently working on them. Ms. Carty had already published the proposed draft rules and regulations, which have been completely vetted, completely reviewed, and now is out to the public for review. And then in addition to that, there is still a cannabis advisory board, and they've already started the search for Hannah Carty's replacement. And just with working with her, she's extremely detailed, she's extremely organized. She has left a roadmap, and she's created enough documents to allow for a seamless transition to a new OCR director. So I don't believe that her resignation will slow us down at all.
But there's still the question, what is taking us so long? I look at the journey from, like I said, the first piece of legislation that Governor Albert Bryan signed back in 2019 to now. And in the meantime, we have seen other states and territories come on board, get marijuana legalization or cannabis, whichever way you want to address it, legalization on board. I can personally tell you, in the state of Nevada, I have a personal friend of mine. Her name is Dion Contine. Anybody can Google her name. I know the governor of Nevada, when they passed their legislation, he was like, Dion, you're on the team to make this happen. I need it to happen in 3 months. Get the taxation laws in check, get vendors in check, and that was her job. He was like, get it done and get it done now. We have a deadline that we want to meet, and there's revenues that can come to the state. What is taking us so long with this?
Politics. It's really the legislation which has been the hiccup. So if you will recall, Senator Sarro had the ownership of the legislation. And there was a battle back and forth somewhat between Government House and Senator Sarro in trying to really get this passed. What ended up passing was a version that Senator Sarro issued years after Governor Bryan had already sent down draft legislation. And when that was issued, there was a mad rush to get it done and get it passed by the legislature at that time. And those members of the legislature were working till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning to get it passed. They got it passed. It's a pretty decent law, but there were some issues. There were some typos. There were some logistical issues that weren't cleaned up in the middle of the night. And that's what needed to be cleaned up. So the largest delay, in my opinion, has just been the politics surrounding the legislation and the delay in getting it passed. There were draft rules and regs drafted for the medical cannabis, but the medical cannabis would have never succeeded because the cost of regulating medicinal cannabis for that small number of people was just cost prohibitive. which is why there was a push to have the recreational passed so that medicinal and recreational can roll out at the same time. But again, unfortunately, in our situation, politics has really slowed down this process.
Lucy, I'm going to come to you on St. Croix. I know you are a keen observer of major policy issues and legislation that goes before the legislature. When you heard this news about the resignation of Hannah Carty, what did you think? I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on how we have gone about the legalization of cannabis in the territory.
Well, it was particularly of interest to me because my initial consumption of the subject matter was based on what was being presented to us, the listeners, readers, and viewers in the community. And the highlight of the issue was the fact that Ms. Carty was working in a separate place of employment outside of her responsibility or during her responsibility with the cannabis entity. What is important to me at this particular point in time, and I'm glad Attorney Walker gave that introduction, it was the legislative approach to the adoption of laws to govern cannabis in the territory. Because I was in the legislature initially when they spoke about medicinal cannabis, then it came up to recreational use. And I think that given the approach and how they went ahead and put the laws together, I think we ought to be more strategic and careful in the development of legislation that we intend to bring some economic and social impact to the community of the Virgin Islands. So on that particular note, I think that I am in agreement with that the strategic legislative process that has utilized to bring about cannabis, not only medicinal, but the recreational use, was flawed, and thereby we're having a timely or untimely implementation of these laws, given the fact that there are a number of concerns that needs to take into consideration. I heard you make mention of the fact of banking laws and the ability for individuals to be able to have the resources that are required to maintain the industry. All these things are very important when we have that type of discussion.
Janika, as the editor of this consortium, I know that you are frequently in contact with the opinions of individuals in our community regarding a variety of subject matters. And I think that just on a cursory view, most people feel, look, in the Virgin Islands, people use cannabis. They're using it every day, 24/7. The government is losing its opportunity to generate revenue. And there are individuals that specialize, have studied on their own, gone away, gotten certifications in anticipation of an actual industry developing. What are some of your readers saying about this news development?
Well, I think that people, having seen the trajectory of the development of, the legislation of surrounding cannabis use, are not very optimistic. Not a lot of people are following Ms. Walker's point of view that the resignation of Ms. Carty would not really create another roadblock. People are expecting further delays because, as was said before, this was really a one-woman show in terms of the operationalization of the legalization process. So yes, you have the Cannabis Advisory Board, but the Office of Cannabis Regulations is the organ that actually would implement all of the framework for cannabis registration and sales. So, for example, we had an announcement by OCR that registration was available for practitioners and for people who are using it in a religious setting. However, the registration platform is not online. So you click on the link from the website and it takes you to a dead page. So there are a lot of issues that still need to be ironed out on the operational side while the public, is looking at the rules and regs for comment. But what needs to be done is still lagging. And so I think a lot of people are skeptical that we can move smoothly into finding Miss Carty's successor without introducing further delays to the process.
that unfortunately has become extremely contentious. And Usi, I'm going to come to you again for the first response on this topic. I hate to go back to remembrance of a Kenneth Mapp State of the Territory, the tale of two cities where one, district in the territory has and the other does not. But unfortunately, with the development of the Clinton E. Phipps racetrack and the timing now with VIGL and the governor's recent response to, an announcement put out by VIGL, and what we just saw in our news roundup, his reaction to that and just saying, look, give us back the track. The chances of them building the Randall Dock James track is nil to none. When you hear the governor of the Virgin Islands saying something like that, it really exacerbates the gravity of this situation. Compounded again with carnival races coming up in this district, a facility that has gone up and is being built on very rapidly within a year almost. It's expected to be completed just about 100%. It's a story of the haves of the have-nots, and I totally dislike it because we should be all singing from the same page, all moving in one direction to push this industry forward. What are your thoughts on what is happening with VIGL, the need for a Racino license first before a track can be built on St. Croix?
Thank you, Leslie, for the question. And I want to begin where you ended it in regards to the haves and the haves not. I think more importantly, individuals are not having a clear understanding of the existing structure and the distinct difference irrespective of a court ruling that ruled that the video lottery terminals are the same as the gaming machines here on the island district of St. Croix. And I make mention of it because in the district of St. Thomas, St. John, a steady set of revenue has been coming in from VLTs that are under the jurisdiction of Southland Gaming that allow them to make that quick investment. In difference to the island of St. Croix, and I clearly understand the position, and you must recall I had the fortunate opportunity to serve 5 years and some months on the Casino Control Commission, and individuals not being aware of some of the behind-the-scenes scenarios that exist. And a good example of that was the letter that was submitted by Ms. Susan Barnes, who represents Treasure Bay VI, locally known to us as Divi Casino, that at one point was the parent company and operator of Trasco over the Randall Dock James racetrack. I make mention of that because there is a settlement agreement between both parties, VIGL and Treasure Bay VI, in regards to the operation of a Racino at the Randall Dock James racetrack. And that settlement agreement makes mention of the fact that for the first 2 years of the existence of a Racino, that the Racino will be operated by Trasco or the parent company Treasure Bay VI. And so that that in and of itself creates some concern on how they will be able to generate sufficient resources and investment in moving on with the development of a racetrack on the island of St. Croix. And I would think that people need to be able to also have that context. And this is not an issue of the chicken before the egg. This is an issue of recurring revenue and resources to make sure not only we construct a racetrack, but the racetrack can be able to properly operate.
Well, I hear they expound upon some points that you made, but VIGL has been operating a casino on St. Croix. And so we would think that I'm a little confused, and I think the community gets confused as well, where it almost seems in both districts, based on what Senator Richard said, I'm going to come to you, Attorney Walker, that gaming almost has to exist in order for horse racing to exist. And I wonder, and perhaps individuals with expertise greater than mine and that are familiar with the industry, is that a necessary component for horse racing to exist in the territory? Because it almost seems that the finances to operate and run a track the way it should be are not there. And unless you have casino gaming or some kind of gaming revenue to support it, then we are looking at trying to beat a dead horse, no pun intended. What do you think about that, Attorney Walker?
Unfortunately, it's true. I represented the Horsemen's Association for a brief period of time during the MAP administration. And during that time, that's when the agreement was executed between Traxco and VIGL. So, what was happening and what has been happening is across the nation, developers are trying to decouple the racino and the casino licensing from the horse racing because the profits are in the licenses, but not necessarily in the horse racing. But as our community definitely wants to keep it together because the Racino revenue funds the maintenance and operations of the track. We can't separate it. If we do, we'll have no horse racing. And that's really what the bottom line is. The issue here with VIGL is that there were a lot of moving parts at the time that they came into the picture. You still had the Traxco agreement. The horsemen had to negotiate an exit from their agreement with Traxco. The government had to also negotiate an exit of Traxco and then bringing in VIGL, which is what resulted in that VIGL Traxco agreement, which doesn't seem quite feasible now. Um, so that's really the issue, but I don't see how they would be able to move forward with the racetrack without the Racino license. The problem is that this thing, just like we discussed cannabis a moment ago, is dragging on too long. And I think when something drags on too long, the community loses trust and confidence that it would actually happen. Um, and so that's basically what the issue is. They're stuck together and they have to remain stuck together for horse racing to survive.
Well, then it seems to me, Ms. Simon, I'm going to come to you, that we really need to reevaluate the value of horse racing. And I say this as someone whose father and grandfather were horse racing commission chairman here in the Virgin Islands, and who the track on St. Thomas, Clinton Phipps, being a cousin of mine, first person that ever put me on a horse was him, and he's one of the best jockeys to ever come out of the Virgin Islands. So it's not like I'm being anti-horse racing here, but I'm being realistic. It does not seem that the economics of the industry on its own can be sustained in the territory. And based on my very little research and what I just heard Attorney Walker said, it seems like around the country, other tracks are dealing with this. So we are at a crossroads here as to how we move forward with the industry. I am interested in hearing your analysis on what your readers are saying, what you have published about this issue as well, because it's been one that has been ongoing for several years here in the Virgin Islands.
My take on this, and I'm gonna, I think, take off my journalist's hat for a moment and put on my communications consultant hat for a while. I think that a lot of the issue here is about communications and the public relations exercises that are going on, between VIGL, between the government of the Virgin Islands, etc. Because I want to take us back a little bit to when the new or current agreement was signed, when the legal question was put to bed and the government really moved to sign the new agreement to continue building the track on St. Croix. There was no discussion at that point in time that the Racino had to come prior to the completion of the track. So I think that the public messaging was maybe not necessarily done in a way to really get everybody on the same page in terms of understanding what the exact timeline and order of operations was for that. So the economics of the situation are what it is. I mean, I'm not an economic analyst to tell you whether it's true or not that you definitely need to marry or keep the gaming aspect coupled with the racing aspect. But I know that horse racing is a very important part of VI culture. And so if the end goal or end objective is to return horse racing to St. Croix, as seems to be going on St. Thomas, quite a pace, then it may be that we have to accept what the economics are telling us, which is that VIGL needs the Racino before they can continue. But I was just looking today at the previous reporting that we did on this, and there was no indication up until quite recently that the Racino license would have to be pursued and approved first. People were very much just speaking about the work that was going to be going into completing the track and getting the track up and running. So I think that if there had been a little more public education around the entire process and a holistic picture painted of what that process would have looked like, the public would be a lot less, irritated and irritable about the seeming delays.
Usi, I'm going to come back to you. And having heard what Attorney Walker said and what Ms. Simon just said, and to bring up the point again of just the governor's utter frustration in the piece that we saw, let's be a little honest here. When VIGL was introduced to the territory and their initial agreement with the government of the Virgin Islands to open casinos in St. Croix and build hotel rooms, which was their original agreement, there has not been a 100% fulfillment of their obligation to the people of the territory and what they have signed on. And now and we've had horsemen on the show. I don't recall exactly if you were a guest when we had on Mr. Bates and others representing the horse owners on St. Croix. But now people are frustrated. And just listening to what Ms. Simon said, horse racing people and people that are horse racing enthusiasts are horse racing enthusiasts. They don't want to hear about no racino and casino. They want horse racing first. So to hear, like she's saying, that we have to build a casino first before the people of St. Croix can get horse racing, that feels like a little bit like a switch and bait on us. Well,
I thank you for your editorial. And I call it that because you said, let's be a little bit honest. I thought we were all being honest from the beginning. The point that I was making, and you made a reference to the fact that VIGL, and I'm not here to defend any particular entity, has been in business on the island of St. Croix and generating the revenues that should have allowed them to be able to proceed with the racetrack. And then that means that you are disposing and dumping into garbage the initial investment that was made prior to the initiation of a lawsuit. For instance, on the island of St. Thomas, the acquisition of land to extend the racetrack at Clinton Phipps, the type of investment for design and development of the facilities. All these things took place prior to the initiation of a lawsuit between Southland Gaming and VIGL. Now, come back to the operation and financing, and I think Attorney Walker hit the nail on the head in regards to investment. As we speak today, it used to be called the Sport of Kings, which is horse racing, but today, throughout the entire USA and in some major ports throughout the world, it requires some sort of additional purses and monies to compete in that particular industry in the territory. And then lastly, I would say this in regards to the expectation of being able to have horse race on St. Croix, supported and sponsored by VIGL, would require a large amount of investment. And even if we had VIGL has the opportunity to proceed with investment, we can't make the comparison of what is being done right now on Clinton Phipps racetrack on St. Thomas to that on St. Croix. In St. Croix, we have a regulatory structure, and I'm glad that Ms. Simon made mention of communication. I was so pleased to attend the hearing held by the Casino Control Commission, pleased to hear the introductory statement that was made by R. Oliver David, the Director of Division of Gaming and Enforcement, which have made the people aware of what is required just to be approved by the Casino Control Commission. The investigation DG has to do, not only of all the entities that are related to VIGL, but of every individual that are a member of these corporate entities that are related to VIGL. That's not required in St. Thomas for Southland Gaming to be able to have VLTs on the racetrack at Clinton Phipps racetrack. So we are comparing apple and oranges.
Well, when it comes down to horse racing, I think people want results, and that's what individuals in the territory want to see. And yes, I think it is our responsibility to always outlay the situation and the context that these things are happening, and it's not all in an individual vacuum. And you're right, there are significant differences that pose challenges in one district that does not exist in the other. However, I'm going to come to you, Attorney Walker. From a legal perspective, and it's always good to have an attorney on the show for these purposes, I think that the leadership of the territory, when introducing VIGL into this territory, had to have known. And you don't just up and file a lawsuit when you're dealing with entities like this. I'm sure warnings came, hey, you might be in violation of contracts that exist. If this does go forward, there will be a lawsuit. Nobody can tell me that those warnings were not ignored. And we have to be honest and frank about that. And so therefore, you're either in a position to put up or shut up. And I think most of the people in the territory have come to that situation now. The basic thing is, people of St. Croix are being told now, there will be no horse racing until we get a Racino. And that seems, like I said, unfair to people. It's either we can do this, or like Ms. Simon says, we adequately communicate to the people of St. Croix, which clearly was not done, because people are now like, what are you talking about? The job wasn't done correctly. We didn't go about this the right way. And as a result, unfortunately, the people of St. Croix are suffering.
A little bit yes, a little bit no. And I agree with Ms. Simon that the communication might have been flawed. And the reason I say that is I'm pretty sure the agreement with the governor indicates that the Racino license is a must-have for the track to be rebuilt. So I'm pretty sure about that. So, and what's interesting is the people who are suffering the most are the horsemen themselves, because they're losing the investment in their horses. If their horses aren't training and aren't running, they're no longer good to them. And the horsemen support VIGL getting the Racino license because they understand the industry. So the people who are directly involved understand what needs to happen, and that communication may not have gone out to the larger public. So, but ultimately, this agreement came out under the MAP administration. The issue was then inherited by the current administration. And ultimately, the racetrack, I don't see how a racetrack can be built and operated with purses that are attractive if that Racino license isn't issued. So they go together, and that's ultimately what needs to happen. And maybe everyone needs to just sit down at the table, have one full-on conversation, hash it out, and move forward, because the agreement with Traxco is another delay to the progress, because Traxco is supposed to have a Racino constructed for it to operate for a period of time, which is going to affect the revenue that VIGL would need to collect to then build out the racetrack. So ultimately, everyone's going to have to come to the table and work out one solution that benefits the people of the Virgin Islands. If they continue arguing the way they're arguing and taking shots the way they're taking shots, that's only going to delay the build out of the racetrack further.
Well, I got to tell you, time flies when you're having fun. I want to thank you, former Senator Uzi Richards, Attorney Key Walker, and editor of the Virgin Islands Consortium, Janika Simon, for joining me on the show today. And that's all the show we have for you today. So be sure to tune in next Sunday at 1 p.m. for an all-new episode of Comes with the Territory. In the meantime, for your news updates, tune into WTJX newsfeed on weekdays at 5 p.m. on 93.1 FM or by downloading the WTJX app. I'm Leslie Kamisiang, and for all of us here at WTJX Channel 12, take care.